Chapter 21. Jehoshaphat died and was buried beside his ancestors in Jerusalem, and his son Jehoram became king. King Jehoram of Judah. This is also told in 2 Kings 8:16-24. King Jehoshaphat had 7 sons: Jehoram, Azariah, Jehiel, Zechariah, Azariah, Michael, and Shephatiah. Jehoshaphat gave each of them silver and gold as well as other valuable gifts. He also put them in charge of the fortified cities in Judah, but he had chosen his eldest son Jehoram to succeed him as king. After Jehoram had taken control of Judah, he had his brothers killed, as well as some of the nation's leaders. He was 32 years old when he became king, and he ruled 8 years from Jerusalem. Jehoram married Ahab's daughter and followed the sinful example of Ahab's family and the other kings of Israel. He disobeyed the Lord by doing wrong. But because the Lord had made a solemn promise to King David that someone from his family would always rule in Judah, he refused to wipe out David's descendants. While Jehoram was king, the people of Edom rebelled and chose their own king. Jehoram, his officers, and his cavalry marched to Edom. Where the Edomite army surrounded them, he escaped during the night, but Judah was never able to regain control of Edom. Even the town of Rimnah rebelled at that time. Those things happened because Jehoram had turned away from the Lord, the God his ancestors had worshipped. Jehoram even built local shrines in the hills of Judah and let the people sin against the Lord by worshipping foreign gods. One day, Jehoram received a letter from Elijah the prophet that said, "I have a message for you from the Lord God your ancestor David worshipped. He knows that you have not followed the example of Jehoshaphat your father or Asa your grandfather. Instead, you have acted like those sinful kings of Israel and have encouraged the people of Judah to stop worshipping the Lord, just as Ahab and his descendants did. You even murdered your own brothers who were better men than you. Because you have done these terrible things, the Lord will severely punish the people in your kingdom, including your own family, and he will destroy everything you own. You will be struck with a painful stomach disease and suffer until you die." The Lord later caused the Philistines and the Arab who lived near the Ethiopians to become angry with Jehoram. They invaded Judah and stole the royal property from the palace, and they led Jehoram's wives and sons away as prisoners. The only one left behind was Ahaziah, his youngest son. After this happened, the Lord struck Jehoram with an incurable stomach disease. About 2 years later, Jehoram died in terrible pain. No bonfire was built to honor him, even though the people had done this for his ancestors. Jehoram was 32 years old when he became king, and he ruled 8 years from Jerusalem. He died, and no one even felt sad. He was buried in Jerusalem, but not in the royal tombs. Chapter 22. King Ahaziah of Judah. This is also told in 2 Kings 8:25-29, 9:21, 27, 28. Earlier, when the Arabs led a raid against Judah, they killed all of Jehoram's sons except Ahaziah, the youngest one. So the people of Jerusalem crowned him their king. He was 22 years old at the time, and he ruled only 1 year from Jerusalem. Ahaziah's mother was Athaliah, a granddaughter of King Omri of Israel, and she encouraged her son to sin against the Lord. He followed the evil example of King Ahab and his descendants. In fact, after his father's death, Ahaziah sinned against the Lord by appointing some of Ahab's relatives to be his advisors. Their advice led to his downfall. He listened to them and went with King Jehoram of Israel to attack King Hazael and the Syrian troops at Ramoth in Gilead. Joram was wounded in that battle, and he went to the town of Jezreel to recover, and Ahaziah later went there to visit him. It was during that visit that God had Ahaziah put to death. When Ahaziah arrived at Jezreel, he and Joram went to meet with Jehu, grandson of Nimshi. The Lord had already told Jehu to kill every male in Ahab's family, and while Jehu was doing that, he saw some of Judah's leaders and Ahaziah's nephews who had come with Ahaziah. Jehu killed them on the spot, then gave orders to find Ahaziah. Jehu's officers found him hiding in Samaria. They brought Ahaziah to Jehu, who immediately put him to death. They buried Ahaziah only because they respected Jehoshaphat, his grandfather, who had done his best to obey the Lord. There was no one from Ahaziah's family left to become king of Judah. Queen Athaliah of Judah. This is also told in 2 Kings 11:1-3. As soon as Athaliah heard that her son King Ahaziah was dead, she decided to kill any relative who would possibly become king. She would have done just that. But Jehoshaphat rescued Joash, son of Ahaziah, just as the others were about to be murdered. Jehosheba, who was Joram's daughter and Ahaziah's half-sister, was married to Jehoiada, the priest. So she was able to hide her nephew Joash and his personal servant in a bedroom in the Lord's temple where he was safe from Athaliah. Joash hid in the temple with them for 6 years, while Athaliah ruled as queen of Judah. Jehoiada makes Joash king of Judah. After Ahaziah's son Joash had hidden in the temple for 6 years, Jehoiada the priest knew that something had to be done, so he made sure he had the support of several army officers. They were Azariah son of Jehoram, Ishmael son of Jehohanan, Azariah son of Obed, Amasiah son of Adiah, and Elishaphat son of Zikri. These 5 men went to the towns in Judah and called together the Levites and the clan leaders. They all came to Jerusalem and gathered at the temple, where they agreed to help Joash. Jehoiada said to them, Joash will be our next king because long ago the Lord promised that one of David's descendants would always be king. Here is what we will do. 3 groups of priests and Levites will be on guard duty on the Sabbath. One group will guard the gates of the temple, one will guard the palace, and the other will guard the foundation gate. The rest of you will stand guard in the temple courtyards. Only the priests and Levites who are on duty will be able to enter the temple because they will be the only ones who have gone through the ceremony to make themselves clean and acceptable. The others must stay outside in the courtyards. Just as the Lord has commanded, you Levites must protect King Joash. Don't let him out of your sight, and keep your swords ready to kill anyone who comes into the temple. The Levites and the people of Judah followed Jehoiada's orders. The guards going off duty were not allowed to go home, and so each commander had all his guards available, those going off duty as well as those coming on duty. Jehoiada went into the temple and brought out the shields that had belonged to King David, and he gave them to the commanders. They gave the weapons to the guards, and Jehoiada then made sure that the guards took their positions around the temple and the altar to protect the king on every side. Jehoiada and his sons brought Joash outside, where they placed the crown on his head and gave him a copy of the instructions for ruling the nation. Olive oil was poured on his head to show that he was now king, and the crowd cheered and shouted, "Long live the king!" As soon as Queen Athaliah heard the crowd cheering for Joash, she went to the temple. There she saw Joash standing by one of the columns near the entrance, which was the usual place for the king. The commanders and the trumpet players were standing next to him, and the musicians were playing instruments and leading the people as they celebrated and blew trumpets. Athaliah tore her clothes in anger and shouted, "You betrayed me, you traitors!" Straight away, Jehoiada said to the army commanders, "Don't kill her near the Lord's temple. Take her out in front of the troops and be sure to kill all her followers." She tried to escape, but the commanders caught and killed her near the gate where horses are led into the palace. Jehoiada asked King Joash and the people to join with him in being faithful to the Lord. They agreed, then rushed to the temple of the god Baal and tore it down. They smashed the altars and the idols and killed Matan, the priest of Baal, in front of the altars. Jehoiada assigned the priests and Levites their duties at the temple just as David had done. They were in charge of offering sacrifices to the Lord according to the law of Moses, and they were responsible for leading the celebrations with singing. Jehoiada ordered the guards at the temple gates to keep out anyone who was unclean. Finally, Jehoiada called together the army commanders, the most important citizens of Judah, and the government officials. The crowd of people followed them as they led Joash from the temple through the upper gate and into the palace, where he took his place as king of Judah. Everyone celebrated because Athaliah had been killed and Jerusalem was peaceful again. Chapter 24, King Joash of Judah. This is also told in 2 Kings 12, 1-16. Joash was only 7 years old when he became king of Judah, and he ruled 40 years from Jerusalem. His mother Zibiah was from the town of Beersheba. While Jehoiada the priest was alive, Joash obeyed the Lord by doing right. Jehoiada even chose 2 women for Joash to marry so he could have a family. Sometime later, Joash decided it was time to repair the temple. He called together the priests and Levites and said, go everywhere in Judah and collect the annual tax from the people. I want this done straight away. We need that money to repair the temple. But the Levites were in no hurry to follow the king's orders. So he sent for Jehoiada the high priest and asked, why didn't you send the Levites to collect the taxes? The Lord's servant Moses and the people agreed long ago that this tax would be collected and used to pay for the upkeep of the sacred tent. And now we need it to repair the temple because the sons of that evil woman Athaliah came in and wrecked it. They even used some of the sacred objects to worship the god Baal. Joash gave orders for a wooden box to be made and had it placed outside near the gate of the temple. He then sent letters everywhere in Judah and Jerusalem asking everyone to bring their taxes to the temple, just as Moses had required their ancestors to do. The people and their leaders agreed, and they brought their money to Jerusalem and placed it in the box. Each day after the Levites took the box into the temple, the king's secretary and the high priest's assistant would take out the money and count it. Then the empty box would be taken back outside. This happened day after day, and soon a large amount of money was collected. Joash and Jehoiada turned the money over to the men who were supervising the repairs to the temple. They used the money to hire stone cutters, carpenters, and experts in working with iron and bronze. These workers went straight to work repairing the temple, and when they had finished, it looked as good as new. They did not use all the tax money for the repairs, so the rest of it was handed over to Joash and Jehoiada, who then used it to make dishes and other gold and silver objects for the temple. Sacrifices to please the Lord were offered regularly in the temple for as long as Jehoiada lived. He died at the ripe old age of 130 years, and he was buried in the royal tombs in Jerusalem because he had done so much good for the people of Israel, for God, and for the temple. Joash turns away from the Lord. After the death of Jehoiada the priest, the leaders of Judah went to Joash and talked him into doing what they wanted. Straight away, the people of Judah stopped worshipping in the temple of the Lord God, and they started worshipping idols and the symbols of the goddess Asherah. These sinful things made the Lord God angry with the people of Judah and Jerusalem, but he still sent prophets who warned them to turn back to him. The people refused to listen. God's Spirit spoke to Zechariah, son of Jehoiada the priest, and Zechariah told everyone that God was saying, why are you disobeying me and my laws? This will only bring punishment. You have deserted me, so now I will desert you. King Joash forgot that Zechariah's father had always been a royal friend, so when the people of Judah plotted to kill Zechariah, Joash joined them and gave orders for them to stone him to death in the courtyard of the temple. As Zechariah was dying, he said, I pray that the Lord will see this and punish all of you. Joash is killed. In the spring of the following year, the Syrian army invaded Judah and Jerusalem, killing all the nation's leaders. They collected everything of value that belonged to the people and took it back to their king in Damascus. The Syrian army was very small, but the Lord let them defeat Judah's large army, because he was punishing Joash and the people of Judah for turning away from him. Joash was severely wounded during the battle, and as soon as the Syrians left Judah, two of his officials, Zobad and Jehozabad, decided to avenge the death of Zechariah. They plotted and killed Joash while he was in bed, recovering from his wounds. Joash was buried in Jerusalem, but not in the royal tombs. The history of the kings also tells more about the sons of Joash, what the prophets said about him, and how he repaired the temple. Amaziah, son of Joash, became king after his father's death. Chapter 25, King Amaziah of Judah. This is also told in 2 Kings 14:1-6. Amaziah was 25 years old when he became king, and he ruled 29 years from Jerusalem, the hometown of his mother Jehoiadan. Even though Amaziah obeyed the Lord by doing right, he refused to be completely faithful. For example, as soon as he had control of Judah, he arrested and killed the officers who had murdered his father. But the children of those officers were not killed. The Lord had commanded in the law of Moses that only the people who sinned were to be punished. Edom is defeated. This is also told in 2 Kings 14:7. Amaziah sent a message to the tribes of Judah and Benjamin and called together all the men who were 20 years old and older. 300,000 men went to Jerusalem, all of them ready for battle and able to fight with spears and shields. Amaziah grouped these soldiers according to their clans and put them under the command of his army officers. Amaziah also paid about 3,400 kilograms of silver to hire 100,000 soldiers from Israel. One of God's prophets said, Your Majesty, don't let these Israelite soldiers march into battle with you. The Lord has refused to help anyone from the northern kingdom of Israel, and so he will let your enemies defeat you, even if you fight hard. He is the one who brings both victory and defeat. Amaziah replied, What am I supposed to do about all the silver I paid those troops? The Lord will give you back even more than you paid. The prophet answered. Amaziah ordered the troops from Israel to go home, but when they left, they were furious with the people of Judah. After Amaziah got his courage back, he led his troops to Salt Valley, where he killed 10,000 Edomite soldiers in battle. He captured 10,000 more soldiers and dragged them to the top of the high cliff. Then he pushed them over the side, and they were all killed on the rocks below. Meanwhile, the Israelite troops that Amaziah had sent home raided the towns in Judah between Samaria and Beth-horon. They killed 3,000 people and carried off their possessions. After Amaziah had defeated the Edomite army, he returned to Jerusalem. He took with him the idols of the Edomite gods and set them up. Then he bowed down and offered them sacrifices. This made the Lord very angry, and he sent a prophet to ask Amaziah, Why would you worship these foreign gods that couldn't even save their own people from your attack? But before the prophet finished speaking, Amaziah interrupted and said, You are not one of my advisors. Don't say any word, or I'll have you killed. The prophet stopped, but then he added, First you sinned, and now you've ignored my warning. It's clear that God has decided to punish you. Israel defeats Judah. This is also told in 2 Kings 14:8-14. King Amaziah of Judah talked with his officials, then sent a message to King Joash of Israel, Come out and face me in battle. Joash sent back a reply that said, Once upon a time, a small thorn bush in Lebanon arranged the marriage between his son and the daughter of a large cedar tree. But a wild animal came along and trampled the small bush. Amaziah, you think you're so powerful because you defeated Edom, but stay at home and do your celebrating. If you cause any trouble, both you and your kingdom of Judah will be destroyed. God made Amaziah stubborn because he was planning to punish him for worshipping the Edomite gods. Amaziah refused to listen to Joash's warning, so Joash led his army to the town of Beth Shemesh in Judah to attack Amaziah and his troops. During the battle, Judah's army was crushed. Every soldier from Judah ran back from home, and Joash captured Amaziah. Joash took Amaziah with him when he went to attack Jerusalem. Joash broke down the city wall from Ephraim Gate to Corner Gate, a section nearly 200 meters long. He carried away the gold, the silver, and all the valuable furnishings from God's temple where the descendants of Obed-Edom stood guard. He robbed the king's treasury, took hostages, then returned to Samaria. Amaziah is killed. This is also told in 2 Kings 14:15-20. Amaziah lived 15 years after Joash died. Everything else Amaziah did while he was king is written in the history of the kings of Judah and Israel. As soon as Amaziah started disobeying the Lord, some people in Jerusalem plotted against Amaziah. He was able to escape to the town of Lachish, but another group of people caught him and killed him there. His body was taken to Jerusalem on horseback and buried beside his ancestors.